So continuing on with the explanation of Matan Abi Shujā, which is a very famous introductory text in the Islamic law according to the madhhab of Al-Imam Al-Shafi'i, where the one who begins his journey in seeking the knowledge and is following the Shafi'i school is among the first texts and the first books that he learns. And so it is very beneficial. It became very widespread, very famous. Muslims in the East and the West, they study it. And they study it in their formal studies. So last week, alhamdulillah, we covered the chapter of Istinja, and we went on a deep dive into the matters of Istinja. And we talked about some of the etiquettes of using the bathroom. We mentioned that Istinja is the removal of the traces of filth that remain on the organ after the human being uses the bathroom. And so we said that anything that exits from the two eliminatory outlets that is moist, except for mani, it is obligatory to make istinja, to do this cleaning up process before praying. So we said that the first thing is that it's an obligation. And when does it have to be performed? Before that Muslim engages in the prayer. Of course, while keeping in mind that the Muslim is forbidden from contaminating himself with filth. So we see here that when we say it's an obligation upon every accountable Muslim to perform istinja, yani the time for performing it is before they pray, and not necessarily that they have to do it right away. Even though sometimes the scholars won't mention it, but it's known that if the person wants to delay making their istinja until they're about to pray and not do it immediately, that they have to avoid contaminating themselves with urine. And they have to avoid contaminating themselves with filth. Because the Prophet ﷺ, as we said last week, that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that among the biggest reasons, or among the most common reasons why a Muslim would be tortured in the grave is because they pollute, they contaminate themselves with urine. And we explained how that istinja is carried out. We mentioned that it can either be done with pure and purifying water, and that is the best if you had to choose only one, or if you wanted to choose only one, then water is best, because water actually removes the traces of the filth that cannot be removed otherwise. Then we also said that it is valid to make istinja with an object that matches the conditions of a stone. What does it mean, matches the conditions of a stone? It means that the material or the object is solid. So like the stone is solid, it satisfies that condition. And it has to be unrespectable religiously, the stone is like that. And it has to be something not wet, so the stone has to be dry. Usually the stone is dry. And it has to be uprooting, which is that the stone or the material takes the filth off, or takes the whatever trace that is on the outlet. it takes it off. These are the conditions. So if there was something like that, if there was an object that had these conditions, whether it was a stone or not, then that can be used for making istinja. And even if the Muslim has water, and he has water available and he can use it and he's not harmed by it, etc., he is able to make istinja with the stone or something like it. Usually the case is that the people nowadays use toilet paper, but still any material or any object that is like the stone that satisfies those conditions, then it can be used to make istinja. So like a stone, like toilet tissue, with the condition that it is dry. Now we said that the best way to make istinja, the most perfect way, is first to clean up the area with the stone or the tissue, and then to wash it with water. So this is the best way. And then we said that if the person was going to choose one over the other, if they're going to suffice with one, then what's best is to suffice with the water. Although it would still be permissible for them to just use the stone or just use the tissue, even if water is present. And we also said that there are certain conditions in order to be able to use the stone without water. We mentioned among them is for the filth that exited from the outlet, for it not to have dried. So if it dries, if the person is sitting, let's say, on the toilet for a long time and the urine dries on their organ, then it will no longer be valid for them to use a stone or tissue in order to make istinja. In that case, they're obligated to use the water. It's specified that they would have to use the water. Another condition in order for it to be valid to use the tissue or the stone is that it has to be at least 3 wipes. And meaning it has to be, the area has to be wiped or and cleaned at least 3 times. So if the Muslim, when they finish using the bathroom, if they wiped only once and it cleaned the area, still they would have to wipe 2 more times as an obligation, as a minimum. If they went 3 times and still they were not able to clean the area, there were still traces of color and of the entity, then the Muslim keeps on wiping until he no longer sees any traces. Another condition is for the the filth that exited, for it not to spread beyond a certain area of the body. So for the backside, if the filth, if it extends to the place that can be seen of the buttocks, when the person is standing up straight, then he has to use water. It would not be valid for him to use the stone or something similar. And for the front, for the male, if what came out of him, the filth that came out of him, if it goes beyond the head of the penis, then he has to use water. For the woman, if it goes to the opening of her vagina, then the vaginal opening or the vaginal canal, if it gets to that area, like the mouth of the vagina, then it would be an obligation to use the water and not to use tissue, and they wouldn't be able to use tissue. So that is a quick recap of al-istinja. Then we mentioned some of the etiquettes of using the bathroom. We mentioned that it's an obligation upon the Muslim to avoid facing or turning their back towards the direction of the Qibla. While urinating and defecating, if they're in an open land and they have no barrier. So in that case, they have to, if let's say the Qibla is east, then they have to avoid facing east or facing west, and they would have to face north or south. But if that Muslim, he has a barrier which has to be 2/3 of a cubit tall and no more than 3 cubits away. If they satisfy the conditions for the barrier, then as long as there's a barrier between them and the direction of the Kaaba, then it would be permissible. And we also mentioned that in the bathroom, that using a place or urinating or defecating in a place that is specified, like a room specified for relieving oneself, then in this case they don't need to be cognizant and aware of which way is the qibla. They could face in any direction. Does anybody have a question about that so far? I see something in the chat. Everything clear so far about that? The rest of the etiquettes, these are things that are recommended not to do and that are better to be left out. And the author mentioned a few of them. He said to urinate or defecate in a hole. He said for one to talk without necessity while one is urinating or defecating. He mentioned not using or relieving oneself in still water and not relieving oneself in a place that people usually seek shade in during the summer or seek shelter from during the winter, like a public place, or under a fruit-bearing tree, etc. So those things, and if the person, let's say he had an orchard and he had a fruit-bearing tree and it was his property and he had to use the bathroom, and so he relieved himself right under the tree, this would be disliked, not forbidden. But if it's somebody else's property, then they would be sinful if that person doesn't accept it. And so that is a quick recap of what we took before. Now we're going to go into the invalidators of WuDuu. So remember, like we said, we're going to read above the line first, and then we're going to read below the line. So we're on page 54, invalidators of WuDuu, ablution. The author, rahimahullah, said, 6 matters invalidate the WuDuu. Whatever exits from the eliminatory outlets, sleeping without being positioned as one who is firmly seated, the loss of sanity because of drunkenness or sickness, the man's touching of a marriageable woman without a barrier, touching the private organ of a human with the inner hand, and touching the anus according to the new school. And according to the new school of Al-Imam al-Shafi'i. Let's read footnote 43. This is beneficial and easy to understand. When Imam al-Shafi'i moved to Egypt, he changed his deduction about many cases. This is his new school. So Imam al-Shafi'i, radiyallahu anhu, he was above average intelligence, he was a genius, he was a prodigy, he was someone who even from a very young age reached to the level of being a mujtahid. Yani, a scholar who is allowed religiously to deduce judgments directly from the Quran and the Hadith that have not already been explicitly mentioned in the Quran and the Hadith. So Imam al-Shafi'i, he is like Imam Malik, he is like Imam Abu Hanifa, he is like Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he is like Al-Layth, he is like Sufyan, he is like, in terms of ijtihad, yani, he has that religious authority. He is that tier or that level of scholar. And so when Imam al-Shafi'i, when he made his ijtihad, the first, his first deductions, or what are known as his old school, occurred while he was in Iraq. Because Imam al-Shafi'i, radiyallahu anhu, he stayed in Al-Madinah, learning from Imam Malik until he became mujtahid, and then he went to Iraq and he documented his madhab. And then he moved to Egypt, and when he moved to Egypt, he changed his ijtihad on many matters, many cases. For him, for Imam al-Shafi'i, he has to follow his new ijtihad. For other Imam al-Shafi'i, we can follow his old one or his new one. And so what the author is saying here is, touching the anus, according to the new school of Imam al-Shafi'i, yani the deductions that he made while living in Iraq, is that touching the anus of a human with the inner hand breaks the wudu. In his old school, before he went to Egypt, he did not make that deduction. Rather, he said that touching the anus of the human with the inner hand does not break the wudu. So that is the old school of Imam al-Shafi'i, radiyallahu anhu. The author said, and I'm now reading below the line, the ritual impurity is something specified by religious rules that takes place in one's body and prevents one from praying and the like until it is lifted. The invalidators of wudu are what ends someone's wudu. So these 6 things that we're going to mention, if any of them occur with the Muslim that is on wudu, that he has the ritual purification, the minor ritual purification, then in that case, if one of those 6 things occurs with that Muslim, then it is judged that his wudu has been invalidated. So he will no longer be considered that he's on wudu. And so he would have to go through the process of wudu again if he wants to pray. So let's say a person wants to pray. They made wudu so they can pray dhuhr, let's say. And then on their way back from making wudu, in order to stand in the prayer, let's say they pass gas. And so now they have to go back, make wudu all over again, and then so they can enter the prayer. So we're going to mention what these invalidators are. The invalidators of wudu are what ends someone's wudu. There are 6 matters that invalidate the wudu. Number 1, what exits from the eliminatory outlets, whether from both outlets or one, whether it is urine, feces, or something else. Whether it usually exits or not, whether it is najis or tahir, except if one's own mani exits from the outlet, even though the exiting of mani makes the ghusl an obligation. So we mentioned that, which is anything that comes out of the human being, of his eliminatory outlets, except mani. If it comes out moist, then the Muslim has to make istinja and his wudu will be broken. In the case of the mani, we don't say that his wudu is broken, we say that now he has to make perform a purificatory bath because he is under major ritual impurity. So if, let's say, someone has discharge, their broken. If they urinate, their wudu is broken. If blood comes out of their urethra, their wudu is broken. If they defecate, their wudu is broken. If they pass gas, their wudu is broken. If something comes out of their rectum that other than feces and other than let's say like discharge or whatever, if like something like worms or stones come out of the person, his wudu would be broken. So whether the thing that came out of the person, whether it was najis or whether it was pure, breaks the person's wudu, except the mani. The mani, like we said, is an exception. We said the mani doesn't break the wudu. The mani coming out by itself doesn't break the wudu, but it makes the ghusl obligatory. The next matter that's mentioned, the second matter, validator of the wudu, is to sleep without having one's buttocks firmly seated. This means if one is sure that he slept and not if he hesitates. If he hesitated, his wudu would still be valid. If one sleeps on his side, back, or any way of sleeping, this invalidates the wudu, except if one sleeps while his buttocks are firmly seated in a way he is sure that he will not pass gas, or the like, while he is sleeping. In this case, his wudu would still be valid. This is so because the companions used to sleep with their buttocks firmly seated in the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ during his lifetime. And afterwards, they used to pray without renewing their wudu. So the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, they used to sit in the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ, let's say waiting for al-Isha. So they're waiting for the Prophet ﷺ so that they can pray Isha, and they're sitting, let's say, what they call Indian style, and they're sitting and they're on the floor of the masjid and their buttocks are firmly planted to the extent where no, let's say, air can escape, no gas can escape, and they sleep like that. And then when it's time to pray, they would wake up and they wouldn't make wudu. So they would actually be asleep. And then when it's time for them to wake up, they would wake up and pray without renewing their wudu. This was narrated by Abu Dawood and Ad-Daraqutni, classified it as Sahih. There's a note here. It says, if one sleeps standing while leaning on a wall and firmly putting one's buttocks to the wall, one's wudu would be invalidated. The exemption is when sitting with the buttocks firmly seated. Also, if one is very thin to a point that if one sits, one's buttocks is not firmly on the ground, then the wudu would be invalidated by sleeping. So if there was a person who, because they were so skinny, when they sat down, their buttocks were not firmly planted on the ground, and so they would have a space, and so possibly they could pass gas like that while asleep. So the judgment is, if the person is sitting down or sleeping whatever way, but without his buttocks firmly planted in a way that the air cannot escape, then if he sleeps like that, his wudu is broken. Now, for the case of hesitating, if a person, they are not sure, did I fall asleep or did I not fall asleep, he judges that he's still on wudu. Because the judgment of what is established through certainty is not removed by a doubt. And that applies to the Islamic law and to the acts of worship. So for example, if I was sure that I was awake, and if I was sure that I had been awake, and then after that, I doubted, did I fall asleep or not? So here, the certainty of me being sure that I was awake and on wudu, it does not get removed, or the judgment of it doesn't get removed just because I now am suspecting or doubting about sleeping. So my doubt about did I sleep or not would not remove the judgment of the certainty that I have that I was awake and on wudu, and that before this occurred to me, in which I wasn't sure if I slept or not. Before that, I was sure that I was awake and I was sure that I was on wudu. Number 3 is the loss of sanity because of drunkenness or sickness. So if one is unconscious because of a sickness, craziness, fainting, being drunk, or the like, one's wudu is invalidated. So here we have like the loss of the mind. So the person becomes insane, he has to make wudu. Even if that was like because the person drank too much alcohol. Or even if it was, let's say, an external factor, biological sickness, that would be, and if that was the reason that they lost their mind, the wudu would be broken. Likewise, fainting. If they faint, the wudu would be broken. Number 4 is the man's touching of a marriageable woman without a barrier. So if the skin of a male touches the skin of a marriageable woman, even if she is dead or he is dead, the alive one loses their wudu. What is meant by male and female person here is the one who is desirable. Hence, if a man touches the skin of a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, his wudu would still be valid. Marriageable means not mahram. A mahram is a person whom one is prohibited to marry in all cases. The sister of one's wife is not a mahram, because although he cannot marry both at the same time, but he could divorce the wife and marry her sister. A mahram is like his mother, sister, daughter, mother-in-law, granddaughter, and the like. For the woman, her mahram is like her father, uncle, grandfather, her son, her grandson, her father-in-law, and the like. So if the skin of a man touches the skin of a non-marriageable woman, a mahram, then their wudu is still valid, even if this takes place with desire. So the man who touches the skin of a non-marriageable woman, a mahram, and is someone who he can never marry, their wudu is still valid. Because like we said, it's only if they touch the non-mahram, and only if they touch the woman who is possible to marry them at one point in time. So he gave the example of the sister-in-law, and perhaps some people that identify as Muslims, they ignorantly think that because this is the sister of my wife, that they become like a mahram, but that is not correct. Then the author was saying that even if they felt desire when touching the mahram, that they would not break their wudu. But let's put like an underline or a highlight for this one. I want to look into something about that. The author said, of course, with desire it is sinful, but it does not invalidate their wudu. This pertains to the touching with no barrier. However, if there was a barrier, the wudu would still be valid. And touching a marriageable woman with a barrier would prevent from the wudu being broken. And it would prevent from the sin, and if it was like a handshake, without desire. Touching the hair, tooth, or nail does not invalidate the wudu, even if the person is an ajnabi. But it is sinful to do that. Yani, let's say that that person is a non-mahram, they're not a mahram, so it's possible you can marry them. So if you touch their teeth, it's haram, even without desire, but there's no wudu broken. The wudu would not get broken. If they touch the hair, the wudu would not be broken, but it's simple. If they touch the nail, the wudu would not be broken, but it would be simple. So, hence, according to the school of Al-Imam Shafi'i, if the skin of the husband touches the skin of his wife, this invalidates his wudu. So basically what we're saying here is the wife, even though it's halal for the husband to touch her skin to skin without a barrier, whether with desire or without desire, this is halal for the husband to do. But still, because the husband is a non-mahram, and because the husband is someone who can be married to that woman, even though he currently is, but because he's a non-mahram, if he touches her without a barrier, whether with desire or without desire, his wudu would be broken. Number 5 is touching the private organ of a human with the inner hand. This means to touch the penis or vagina of a human with the inner part of the bare hand. What Judge Abu Shujā is talking about here is not the back of the hand, but the inner part of the hand. This is the part that does not appear when you put your palms together, open your fingers, and press a little. So from this it is clear that if one touches the private part of a human with the back of his hand, or the part between his fingers, or the side of his hand, his wudu would not be invalidated. This also applies if the private part was that of a little boy or a girl. Also from this, it is understood that if one touches the private part of an animal with the inner part of the hand, this does not invalidate the wudu. This is so because Abu Dawood, At-Tirmidhi, An-Nasa'i, and Ibn Majah narrated that the Prophet ﷺ said so these three, they narrated this. Abu Dawood, At-Tirmidhi, and An-Nasa'i. And Ibn Majah also. He narrated that the Prophet ﷺ said what means the man who touches with the inner part of his hand, his private part, let him make wudu. This was classified as Sahih by Al-Hakim, Ibn Hibban, and others. So there are other hadith that have the status of being confirmed that the chain is trustworthy. So there are hadith that have this category when it comes to the law. So there's certain things in the law that are explicitly mentioned in the hadith. For example, like here, the man who touches with the inner part of his hand his private parts, let him make wudu. This is classified as Sahih by Al-Hakim, Ibn Hibban, and others. So here, those that they went according to this hadith, they use it as evidence that if the Muslim touches the inner part of his hand, with the inner part of his hand, if he touches with the inner part of his hand, his private part, then the Prophet ﷺ is ordering him to make wudu. And in the school of Imam al-Shafi'i, he interprets this order to be an obligation. Because in the Shafi'i school, the man who touches his private part or a private part, a human private part, with the inner part of the bare hand, then according to a Shafi'i, that person breaks their wudu. So he will be obligated to make it. And number 6 is touching the anus according to the new school. This means touching the anus with the inner part of one's hand according to the new saying of a Shafi'i. Al-Imam al-Shafi'i, in his new saying, that is after he went to Egypt, his ijtihad changed in what pertains to touching the anus with the inner part of the hand. In his new school, he said it is an eliminatory outlet, and so touching it with the inner part of the hand invalidates the wudu. So Imam al-Shafi'i, like we said, he was highly advanced. He was a rare, strong mind. And so Imam al-Shafi'i, he changed his deduction, he changed his opinion about that ruling. And instead of saying that touching the anus of the human does not break the wudu, and he changed it to that it does break the wudu. And we can go according to this, or we can go according to that. So if, let's say, you have young children and they wear diapers and you want to do Shujā for them, you can, it's permissible, but if you touch, let's say, their anus with the inner part of the hand, this would break the wudu according to the new school. But according to the old school, it will be considered that it does not break the wudu. So whoever wants to follow the new school, they can, whoever wants to follow the new school, they can for example, change the diapers or clean the children after using the bathroom wearing gloves. So if there's a barrier, it doesn't break. If there's a barrier, it doesn't break the wudu. There's a note here that says, some Shafi'i scholars said that eating the meat of camels invalidates the wudu, whether the meat was raw or cooked. This is so because there's a hadith that a man asked the Prophet ﷺ, when I eat lamb meat, do I renew my wudu? The Prophet ﷺ said no. The man said, what about camel meat? The Prophet ﷺ said yes. This was narrated by Muslim. Shafi'i was not sure about the classification of the aforementioned hadith, so he said, if it is sahih, then my saying is that eating the camel meat invalidates the wudu. He said he died before checking it, but others classified it as sahih, so it is a strong saying in the Shafi'i school. The other said, note, among the rules in fiqh, and what is a base for a lot of judgments, is that the doubt does not affect the judgment's original status. Hence, if one makes wudu, one would be on tahara. This is the original status. If later one doubts if one invalidated one's wudu or not, one goes back to one's original status and considers oneself on WuDuu. So if one wakes up in the morning, makes WuDuu and prays, then if this person wonders, did I validate my WuDuu or not, this doubt does not affect his purification. Also, if one did not make WuDuu and then doubted, did I make WuDuu or not, one considers oneself not on WuDuu and takes according to the original status. So, also if one did not make WuDuu and then doubted, did I make WuDuu or not, one considers oneself not on WuDuu and takes according to one's original status. So by that, alhamdulillah, we finished the invalidators of WuDuu. It's very important for the student of the Islamic law to repeat and review, because the cases, they are very specific, and it's the difference between valid and invalid, or halal and haram, or forbidden or obligation. And so the Muslim who wants to follow the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam perfectly, and he needs to have that knowledge of the Islamic law. So this last judgment here is very beneficial. It applies to many scenarios. It is mostly helpful for on a day-to-day basis for the Muslim if he doubts about being on WuDuu, or if he doubts about an invalidator of the WuDuu occurring. So let's say that the Muslim doubted, did I pass gas or not? So he goes by what is his original state and his original situation. The original situation is that he was on WuDuu. And so when that is the case, if later he doubts, did I pass gas or not? Like he felt something happening. He felt like there was some movement or like something. And so he wasn't sure. Did it actually occur or not? Did I actually pass gas or not? In this case, he judges that he's on WuDuu. Same thing with, let's say, sometimes the person feels like something came out of him. So as long as he's doubting, as long as he's not certain that something came out, then he judges that he's on WuDuu. And the same example that we gave also about sleeping. If the person, let's say they were, let's say lying on their side, and they, let's say their eyelids were heavy and they were feeling groggy, and then they doubted after that, did I fall asleep or not? Was I sleeping or not? They're still on WuDuu. And so that is the judgment. That's what this judgment is talking about here. And this is a good way to say it too. The doubt does not affect the judgment's original status. Because literally, if a person were to translate it, they would say certitude or certainty is not removed by doubt. But so that's not the meaning, because obviously if someone is doubting, then they don't have certainty. But what it's referring to is that if the person is doubting, let's say they doubt, did I pass gas or not? Then how do they judge themselves? Am I on WuDuu or am I not on WuDuu? So they go by their original status, and their original situation, which is that they are on WuDuu. Because before they doubted, did I pass gas or not, they were sure that they're on WuDuu. So like the example was given, that if a person, let's say, they woke up and they used the bathroom, they made istinja, and then they made WuDuu, and then they prayed, let's say, al-duha or al-subuh, and then they were going about their day, and then all of a sudden, in the middle of their day, they think to themselves, did I break my WuDuu? Did I use the bathroom? Did I touch my private part? Did I fall asleep without my butt firmly planted? Did I have skin-to-skin contact with a marriageable member of the opposite gender that's at the age where they're normally desired? They're going through the list of things that if they occur, their wudu is invalidated. And they're wondering, did I do this, did I do this, did I do this? So, but they can't figure it out. They're like, I'm not sure if I went to the bathroom. I'm not sure if I touched the skin of a marriageable woman. I'm not sure if I passed gas. I'm not sure if I fell asleep without my buttocks firmly planted. So in that case, what happens? Since the thing that he was sure about was that he was on wudu, then he goes by that. So he doesn't, and it's automatic. The religion has made this rule or has this rule established in it, and all you got to do is follow it. So that the person would not become a victim of the whispers of the shaitan. Because the one who is ignorant, for example, he would feel like he passed gas, but he's not sure. So what would he do then in that scenario? Which way would he go? He can't just pick based off whims. He would have to pick based off knowledge. And so here the knowledge is telling us that if the original state was purification, then you go by that, what you were sure of. And vice versa. Let's say the person was sure that they had passed gas. But so let's say the person, they were on wudu, they prayed, then they passed gas. So they were sure they passed gas. And it's confirmed for them that it happened. But then afterwards, and after time passed, they passed gas, etc. Then afterwards, they wondered, did I make wudu after I passed gas? Because they say now it's time for them to pray again, and then they realize, oh, I passed gas, and then they doubt, did I make wudu after I passed gas or not? In that case, what are they doubting about? The occurrence of the purification. What's the thing that they were for sure about? That was the original status, that they passed gas. So here they judge themselves that they are not on wudu, because they're not sure if the thing that would give them the judgment of being in purification, they're not sure that occurred. What they're sure did occur is that they passed gas. And inshallah, next week we'll start a new chapter, which is the things that make the obligatory ghusl an obligation. So the things that, if they occur, then that Muslim, he would have to make the ghusl, or that individual would have to make the obligatory ghusl. Are there any questions about anything that we mentioned? Now keep in mind that different imams have different opinions and valid differences of opinion about what invalidates the wudu and what does not. So if there's something that, let's say you learned in another madhab about the invalidator of wudu, then just keep in mind that some imams are different. For example, like Al-Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu, he did not judge that if the individual touches the skin of the marriageable member of the opposite gender, that is at the age where they're normally desired without a barrier, Abu Hanifa did not judge that breaks the wudu. So just keep in mind that there are differences of opinion amongst the imams about some of these invalidators. No questions today? نهلل لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. رب اغفر لي